And I realized that for most of my life, including my career, I'd been trying to act extroverted, that I had grown almost ashamed of who I was as an introvert.
Stacey, I'm so excited to have you for this episode. Similar to everything I've read about you and how you describe yourself and your leadership style, I feel very much that I am that introverted person, and I know we're going to talk a lot about that. I've self-described. I've taken on the title of extroverted introverts because I think we're going to talk a lot about the need to be present and visible and out there as a leader and what that means for us who are maybe quieter folks or paying attention and listening and not doing all the talking. So, what does that mean for you? Where did you come up with the idea and the coaching around that?
So I will say that as I've told this story, the timeline for it has gotten longer and longer to the point where I now realize my timeline started when I was in preschool, if you can believe it. And I say that because I realized that from the time we're maybe 3 or 4 years old, from the time we're socializing with other kids and we're out in the world, we start to hear these messages that we didn't know the words at the time, these terms introvert and extrovert, of course, but we hear messages that being extroverted, right, having more friends, wanting to play with kids on the playground at recess, wanting to build a tower of blocks, not by yourself, but with others, certainly not wanting to stay home and read by yourself. All of those things that we later come to find are associated with the term extrovert are better somehow. And we get that message really starting in preschool, throughout elementary school, even in high school, when you think about what seems to be better, right? Having more friends, going out on more Saturday night, being more social. If you want to stay home and watch a movie or do crossword puzzles or, God forbid, read a book, right? There's something wrong with you. That's seen as less than. And I think that I got that message, as many introverts did, growing up. And then I continued to get the message in college in similar ways. And then when I was out in the working world, um, the same thing carried over into my career. So I would get messages, and many of us do, because most workplaces are designed with extroverts in mind, and I can talk a little bit more about what that means. But essentially, if you're more of a collaborator, if you come up with ideas on the spot without needing to think about them, if you like to talk about your ideas rather than putting them on paper or typing them up because that's so boring, right? We hear that all of these extroverted type of behaviors are somehow better than the opposite, than if you're an introvert, and those behaviors are what are rewarded. And it wasn't until I took a Myers-Briggs type indicator assessment when I want to say it was about 15 years ago. I was working for a nonprofit. And for any of your listeners not familiar, MBTI, Myers-Briggs, it's the world's most commonly used personality assessment. And it tells you what your preferences are, basically the way you're wired, along 4 different dimensions, one of which is how you give and lose energy with the world. So introverts tend to be fueled by time spent by ourselves or with just one other person. We like to go deep with subject matter expertise. We're fueled when we can spend time thinking about things ourselves. And extroverts are the opposite. They're fueled by engaging with a lot of other people, thinking out loud, collaborating. And when I took this assessment and I saw, oh, I'm introverted, it was like, oh, of course I'm introverted, right? I hadn't ever put that word to who I was. And I started to learn about all of the gifts and strengths that went along with introversion. And I didn't see my introverted traits as strengths. Fast forward a bunch of years, I decided to go back to school and get a master's in organizational development and leadership. I became a complete leadership junkie, got certified in Myers-Briggs, and I get up in the morning now, and my purpose is to help other introverts learn how to embrace, identify, and use their strengths so they can stop pretending to be something they're not and be a lot happier and more successful.
I'm so glad you shared that story with us, Stacey, because so much of that resonates, and the idea that if you aren't an extrovert, it's less than or it's a negative thing, and it's so not. You can There's room for both of people
Mhm.
types of people in the world. and and yet, yeah, I definitely experienced that. For me, it was the idea. I think people use the word shy, for at least for myself, and it was, oh, she's shy, or she doesn't talk because she's shy. And I was looking at the world and observing everything, and I didn't really even know what shy meant. And to your point, you kind of internalize some of it as well, and you take on some of the negativity and the stigma around that. And it can be quite a lot to break free from the conditioning around those words and the expectations that they come with too. What do you think?
Yeah, and being shy is very different than being introverted. Like many people who are shy are introverted and vice versa, but they're mutually exclusive. And like to your point, it wasn't that you were shy necessarily; it's that you were stepping back and observing, and you were getting even if you might not have realized it, you were getting fueled by that. And so when people, let me ask you, when people would say, "Oh, she's just shy," right? Do you think how did that make you feel? Did you take it as a compliment?
Not at all, no.
Right, and the same is true if someone were to say, "Oh, she needs a little more time to think it through," right? They're not meaning that as a compliment, and it's this extrovert bias that we have, especially at work, but I think in society more broadly, and the words that are associated more with introversion, are not seen positively, and right, and it affects our self-esteem.
It reminds me of that very cliche phrase, "squeaky wheel gets the grease," or oil, depending on
Mhm.
what your cultural background is. But yeah, I've heard it multiple times. Well, squeaky wheel gets the grease, squeaky wheel gets the oil, and I'm responsible for saying that too, because to your point, there are work environments, especially where being that extrovert gets recognized and seen and rewarded. So tell us a little bit about why the work environment is that way, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so, what that looks like is people tend to respond better to someone who gives an idea right on the spot. So picture you're in a meeting, right? And there's some your boss or the meeting leader poses a question, you're grappling with some kind of issue, whether it's you're trying to reach more people with your services, you're trying to increase sales, you're trying to grow your business in some way. And the question is put out there. And the people who step up right away and they're thinking out loud, so you get to see what their thought process is. You see, maybe you're seeing how creative or innovative or intelligent they are. The idea they're coming up with isn't necessarily the best idea, but you're getting a window into how they think. And then you picture the person who's introverted, and that person is more likely to need time to step back and think. And that could be done either by requesting a meeting agenda in advance, right? So if you know in advance as an introvert and you can give those topics some thought and do your research, which we tend to be really good at. We tend to be really good at preparing. Then you're going to show up and you're going to make a better impression at that meeting, perhaps. Or if you're able to leave the meeting and sit with the question, you know, look for data, look for stories, come up with evidence, and then come back with your ideas. Your ideas are not necessarily going to be any better or any worse than the extrovert who came up with the idea at the meeting. But to get there, your process is different. And so our workplaces tend to um, the default is that on the spot, right? People equate quickness, speed of coming up with ideas with intelligence or leadership, and that's just not the case. So that's a big one.
How do you advocate for an environment where you can take that appropriate amount of time to innovate and ideate? How do you advocate for yourself or for others to make that environment happen so that both types of people can thrive?
That's a great question. So, one thing that I love to recommend is the first time a team comes together, whether it's a new team forming or it's a current team that's sitting down to tackle a new project. What I recommend is at the first meeting, everyone go around the table, whether it's an actual physical table or you're on the Zoom screen, and for everyone around the table to share with the group, what do you want the rest of the team to know about what you need to be successful, to show up as your best self? And that's an opportunity for introverts and extroverts to say, for example, let's say for an introvert to say, for me to do my best work, I need a balance of collaborative work time and individual work time. Or I need opportunities to give you my ideas in writing. Or it's very important for me to have an agenda ahead of time. Now, that's really, I'd say that's the best practice, whether you're an introvert or extrovert. And then the extroverts can do something similar, right? Anyone just shares, what do you need to be successful? And that begins to give people a window into who you are, how you're wired, and hopefully they'll respond to that. Another thing I say as a manager, I think it's really important for you to ask your staff that question. What do you need from me? What do you need from this environment? What structures are going to set you up to do your best work, to give me your best ideas, to show up as your best self? So it's asking the question, and it's being willing to be upfront as an introvert about what you need.
That's really good practical advice, not just in determining what do my introverts, extroverts need, but in knowing who we have on our team and what kind of environment do they need to thrive. But I love that it is specifically focused on how can we collaborate best as a group and then for you as an individual. So I'm going to steal that because I love that so much. It's really great. I hope everybody listening can use that in some kind of takeaway. It makes me think too, we've gone through a huge shift in society from working in person to then having to very quickly and somewhat chaotically figuring out the remote world for those of us especially affected during 2020 and COVID. And then, now's the return to work has set in for some folks, and they're back in the office. Those of us are still remote and online. And I preface all of that because I understand there are still those two different dynamics of in person and remote virtual presence. So, is there a difference in how introverts show up when you are in a remote setting versus a physical workplace? Is there no difference? How do you see that?
Yeah, there are differences and there are similarities. So I'd say one of the ways that it's harder for introverts is rooted in the fact that we're very good at reading body language and picking up on nonverbal cues. And when you're looking at someone on a 1 by 1 inch picture of them on a Zoom screen, if you're in a big group or a sizable group, it's very hard to pick up on those nonverbal cues. I mean, for anybody, but especially for introverts, where the nonverbal cues are a big part of the information we take in, and they help us to pick up on what someone's priorities and needs are. So that's a loss, particularly for introverts. The other reason I think it's harder for introverts is that while virtual work, it's great, we can work from home, we don't have to commute. It's also harder to disconnect because there's often this expectation that you're always available and that it's not just the hours of 9 to 5 or whatever the typical workday is for you, but that, oh, well, you have your laptop, you have your cell phone, you should be able to respond to questions. You should be able to, work on something after normal business hours. And for introverts, especially, we need that time to disconnect and recharge away from people. So if that cuts into our recharge time, it really hurts our ability to show up as our best selves and do our best work. The flip side of that is I think it's a little easier because I think it's a little easier to step away when you're at home, right? That you can, especially for the time if you're not on a work call, you can, maybe it's easier to go for a walk or go to your gym in the basement if you have an exercise bike, or to disconnect in other ways that give you that separation from the workplace. I think it makes that a little easier.
If you're a leader and you've gone through that exercise of getting insight from your team and you know that you have introverts and extroverts and you're creating that space where they can both collaborate together, if you're in a remote setting, Stacey, are there different ways that you can help the team members who are more introverted connect better, brainstorm better in a way that isn't all about speaking up and being that loudest voice in the room?
That's a great question. So, what I would encourage is having opportunities for collaboration in smaller groups over Zoom, right? So if I'm looking at you right now on the screen, I think you're about 4x4 or 5x5, right? Your picture's a little bigger because it's just the two of us. And as an introvert, this is a very comfortable conversation for me because we're one on one. So I think to the extent that as a manager, you can give your introverted team members opportunities to be in a one-on-one situation, or even maybe it's 3 or 4 people, no more than that. I'd say that's gonna make introverts more comfortable and have them do their best work. And then the other thing is we tend to be really good writers. And so give your introverted team members opportunity to contribute ideas in writing. And there are all kinds of fun apps these days. I think Jamboard is no longer in use. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there are plenty of apps where it's kind of a virtual whiteboard where people can put post-it notes. And maybe you set that up and you let your introverted and extroverted employees use that so they have a couple days, 24 hours, whatever it is, to contribute ideas on some topic.
That is one of my favorite things to do is to whiteboard. And when we moved remote, I thought, oh no, I'm losing my whiteboard. But no,
Yeah.
there are so many great platforms. I've not tried Jamboard, but I've used Mural. For anyone listening, I'm not an affiliate, but Mural is an awesome board. I love that Zoom has its own whiteboard feature now too. They've had it for a
Oh, I saw
while.
that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it is so much easier now to create those different kinds of exercises, or I know brain writing is a part of that, where you have people write out their ideas and then submit and bring them. And so I love that advice because that speaks to different ways that we can communicate together that don't have to be verbal and speaking. So I appreciate you sharing that. We're talking about team members in general. So, what does it mean for an introvert who's a leader now? Because now it's not just about speaking up in a group, but you're guiding and you're leading the group. So, what kind of ways do you help people navigate the change in your role and your responsibility?
The primary way that I do that is my coaching practice. So my business is called I Factor Leadership. The I Factor being all the things that make you great as an introvert, and I chose that name because really the focus of my work is on what makes you great as an introvert. I use a framework called appreciative coaching, and the idea of appreciative coaching is it's totally rooted in helping individuals, introverts in particular, identify what their innate strengths are, their innate strengths and gifts, and then figuring out how do I use those strengths and gifts to do my job better, to get recognized, to move into leadership. And then when I'm actually in leadership, to be that leader. And typically, the types of strengths that are going to come up in that process are introverts tend to be highly empathetic. So we're very good at keying into other people's needs and priorities, which is super important as a leader. We also tend to be good at deep and thoughtful analysis. So we're not making rash decisions when we're faced with a problem or we're trying to figure out how to grow our company or our organization. That's another piece of it. We tend to be, as I mentioned earlier, very good at picking up on nuances in situations. So part of it is reading body language when you're talking about nuances in individuals, but also in understanding, reading between the lines in different situations. Our ability to pick up on nuanced context tends to be very strong. So there's that. And then the fact that we tend to be very strong writers. So communicating your vision, some of it is going to be perhaps on a stage or in front of a conference room table, but we're going to tend to be really motivating and effective about communicating a vision when it's something we put in writing.
I always love having something in writing too, because if there is a lack of understanding or clarity, you can refer back to it and hold yourself accountable for what you wrote on one hand, but then you also have it not necessarily set in stone, but you have it set for people who maybe need that reminder or they need to reference something, and it's not living as words simply hanging in the air too. When it comes to well, everything you said, Stacey, it demonstrates to me the understanding that introverts can be great leaders. So, are there other characteristics or other traits that you would highlight in an introvert that also make them a great leader, or any of the maybe you have a top three personality traits that are ways to
Ah.
leverage. Yeah.
So I think the ones I just mentioned would be in the top, but I'll share another one, and this one I think surprises people. And that is that introverts actually tend to be very good presenters. So people often think, oh, introverts don't like to be on a stage. They don't like people looking at them. They don't like to present in a big group. And yes, many of us, myself included, we don't like people people looking at us like in a big group. However, introverts have a lot of traits that set them up to be really powerful presenters and that make presenting a really nice forum for them. So one, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, we're very good at preparing. We're good at doing our research, pulling together data. And for the most part, if you're doing a big presentation, you're not doing it on the fly. So you're going to have an opportunity to present. We also tend to be great storytellers. And that's because many of us are voracious readers. So we've been taking in stories most of our lives, and we're very good at weaving a narrative and delivering it. Um, the and the other piece of it, and to me, this is like when it all clicked, why it makes sense that we're good presenters and we like to do it, is that when you're up on a stage, you're not having to engage in small talk, right? You're up behind that podium and no one's chatting with you. Your speech is planned, you have your slides, all that stuff. Maybe there'll be questions at the end, but for the most part, you're kind of in a bubble. And so you've prepared what you're going to say, you have the facts, you have your stories, and you don't have to make idle chatter about the weather with someone.
Stacey, I think you just affirmed my whole life that for a lot of people felt very contradictory because like you, that introverted nature was very apparent early on. I went into theater and storytelling, and I do love to present. I still get butterflies, but I love to present because it's not about me. I hate really like talking about myself. And to your point, we don't want that spotlight or that magnifying glass on us,
Yeah.
but it is about the purpose and the storytelling and connecting with people. And I feel like it can be quite confusing for others who don't understand. You just affirmed all of that, so thank you.
And it makes me think of when we started our conversation today, and you referred to yourself as an extroverted introvert. And it's so interesting because so many of the podcasts I've been on, the hosts have used that phrase, um, where they say I'm an ambivert, and I hear that from a lot of people. And I don't know if this is true for you, but I have a theory that one of the reasons people say that is because not everyone understands what it means to be introverted. And so if maybe you were thinking, well, I like to be on the stage, I like to present, so that means I'm really not an introvert, but those can be introvert friendly activities. So I think that could be a part of
I
that.
think you just unlocked it for me because you're right. I've used that phrase, and I find it interesting that other people have used it too, other podcast hosts too. But you're right. It's using it to explain away what I have been conditioned to feel is something contradictory about myself. And that's why I say you've just affirmed it all. It all makes so much more sense. And we kind of have to own that. So in a lot of ways, it's me also recognizing we have to own our introverted nature because there really is nothing wrong with it, to your earlier point. And I know there's nothing wrong with that, but we've been taught that it means we've been put in this box. I think that it means that you're closed off and you don't like to talk and you're quiet and shy and rattling down the negativity list. But
Yeah, the other thing I'll say is that being an introvert it's not an all or nothing proposition. So there are going to be different situations where you're more comfortable, you Rebecca, but you the the universal you, people out there are going to be more comfortable being more social, displaying some extroverted characteristics, personality traits. They're going to be more comfortable doing that in some situations than others, and they can do it. And I use this analogy of when I'm working with my coaching clients, I ask them to pick up a pen with their dominant hand and sign their name. And I ask them, what was that experience like? And they say things like, oh, it was easy. I didn't even think about it. It was mindless. And And then I say, okay, now put the pen in your other hand and sign your name. And it typically takes a little longer for them to do. And I'll say, okay, now what was that like? And they say, oh, it was awkward. It was, I had to really think about it. It didn't come out as nicely as when I write with my, my dominant hand. And that's a great analogy for being introverted or extroverted. So if you're introverted, that's your dominant hand. That's your default. It's going to be the easiest. It's going to come out the cleanest, the prettiest, but it doesn't mean you can't do it with your other hand. And there are going to be some times when you're going to need to.
That's a really great illustration and reminder for all of us too, that we have our default, and if you know it and can own that, then you can leverage that as a strength and mitigate the weakness or perceived weakness. Not saying that it is, but it often isn't. Maybe how we have to show up in certain situations. Maybe we have to lean into some discomfort. And if we recognize and understand ourselves, then we can have at least an easier time in that situation because we know ourselves well enough. If that's what I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that you said earlier, but understanding yourself and knowing that the introvert and extrovert are getting their energy from different types of interactions and settings makes me also think about navigating office politics or just a really energized dynamic situation and how draining that can be. I think about for the remote world, I think about Zoom fatigue. And, as a leader, sometimes we're on the most calls all day, checking in with our team members, and it can leave you really, really tired and drained. So, do you help introverts, especially leaders, navigate and cope with the rise and fall of energy levels or the Zoom fatigue, as I call it?
So I think that there are, and I can share this for you in the call notes. I created a document called it's Daily Productivity Hacks for Introverts. And it basically gets into how can you manage your energy levels throughout the day so that you can be doing your best work and get the most done. And a big part of that is setting up a routine for yourself. So I'll share a couple tips from that guide. One, I think a morning startup routine is really important. So whether that's, it could be meditating, it could be going for a walk, practicing yoga, something to calm yourself at the start of the day, and kind of I think of that as kind of putting the cork on your energy. So keeping whatever energy you woke up with in the morning, like kind of putting that all in so that you can hold on to it as long as possible. So that's how I recommend starting off. Another thing I recommend is something called task batching. And what that means is scheduling your day where you're doing the same types of a certain type of activity for a certain period of time, and then switching to another type of activity later on. And when I say a type of activity, that could be administrative work, it could be creative work, it could be strategic work. So for me, for example, I know that I'm a morning person. So that's when I do my most creative, strategic work. So what I'll do is I will try to block on my calendar, or if I have meetings that are centered on something particularly strategic or otherwise cerebral, I try to do that in the morning. So one is I'm aligning the tasks with the time of day when I have the most energy for them. And two, by doing all of your strategic, cerebral stuff at one time and then doing your administrative stuff at another time, what that does is it prevents the energy loss that often happens when you're switching between types of tasks. So if you go from strategic to administrative to strategic to creative, and you're going back and forth throughout your day, as an introvert, we tend to be more drained by that. So to the extent that you can schedule against that, I recommend.
I'm glad you recommend that. Well, first of all, I never thought about the idea of conserving energy in the morning. And maybe that's from, I think, a lot of the ideas that are out there, getting your early morning workout in and kind of hitting the ground running, or diving into something energetic and not necessarily. I haven't seen this is personally, I'm sure audience members have heard different, but quieting yourself or allowing for that quieter moment because you're preparing for the rest of the day's activities. So I really like that. And I like that that's something that I can personally take away. So I'm going to try that myself, Stacey, but I hope that people listening can take something from that too. because I'm wondering if it might be the opposite for the extrovert. Do they need that quick burst of energy or activity to get their day going? So something maybe to experiment with if you're listening and you haven't quite found your morning routine. But the other part that you mentioned, the time or task batching, I love that because I teach my team time blocking and task batching, but I never really thought of it as helpful for introverts, especially. So it makes sense why I've gravitated towards that. Do you find that it helps the extroverts as well, or are there different kinds of ways that they like to structure the calendar that help them a little bit more to optimize their day a little bit better?
So I'd say so, and you mentioned time blocking, and that's another thing I recommend. And so the time blocking piece of it, when I think about introverts, is it's really important for introverts, at least when I think about time blocking, that I recommend building in blocks of time that are meeting free, right? That hopefully you can say to someone, if you're seeing this on my calendar, try not to schedule something there, or to literally schedule time to take a walk or to have a break for yourself where you're not going to be with other people. So I think that's more important for introverts than for extroverts. I think that the extroverts tend to be fueled by going from one meeting to the next, from engaging with one group of people to another group of people. And I think that overall workplaces and work days are designed with extroverts in mind. Like no one thinks twice for the most part about scheduling back-to-back meetings. So for an introvert, anything we can do to help prevent that energy loss by doing the task batching, I think it's more important that we do something like that for ourselves.
The wheels are turning because I'm already thinking about, all right, I'm guilty of scheduling back to back meetings. And in my mind, it's like, well, to your point earlier about task batching, if we're having all the meetings that we can and in gathering people, then they don't have to shift from one type of activity to the next and back and forth and get distracted and lose their focus. But on the other hand, too, we still have to be mindful of how many meetings back to back are too many meetings, and and how does that flow? So it can be quite a conundrum, I know, for those of us who are in that position of being the scheduler organizer. But it does make me think a little bit beyond what maybe we all assume to be the normal, and give us a little bit of time to reflect. And maybe that's the introvert in me. We probably need to reflect on how we're setting up not just our own days, but the days for our team members too, as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that I know some organizations do now is they have a practice of, instead of having 60-minute meetings, they have 50-minute meetings. So they build in that 10-minute buffer. It doesn't always work, right? Sometimes they'll still go over if they have to, but having that as a goal, at least having that be something they aim for, so that you're giving people that, you can take a bio break, you can meditate for 5 minutes. You can just go for a walk, or just not engage with other people for 10 minutes, whatever it is. That's a nice practice.
I love that you say bio break because I do that too. I think we're leadership twins or something, Stacey. Because
Yeah, I feel that.
it,
I feel it.
it's so helpful to have that buffer time. Some people call it slack time too. I know I'm also guilty of going into the buffer time, so something that I've asked my team to keep me honest about this year. But have at least having the understanding or the realistic understanding that things are going to take longer than you anticipate. And if we give ourselves too much time, then we're also going to take all of that time too, versus can we be a little bit more efficient in our work meetings, and can we find better, more concise ways of communicating with each other person to person? Sometimes that meeting could have been an email or a Slack message. So one of the things that I think about as an introvert, and I know it can be a hot topic for those of us who have that default, is the idea of networking. And I bring it up because it can be really important for leaders to network. It can be important to network internally in the company as well as externally. So, do you have any tips for us and how we can make, I prefer to call it connecting and building relationships, but the generic networking, how can we be better or find our own way of making those connections?
Great question. And this, like everything I advise, it's all rooted in how can you as an introvert tap into your strengths to do this thing. And so I'll give the example of, let's say you're going to a large conference. And often that, that used to make me break out in a sweat, didn't love it so much. And there's often this pressure to, when we think about networking, because we think about it in terms of how extroverts typically do it and what extroverts' goals are for networking. And so what I say is don't make it your goal to collect 50 business cards or meet 50 new people at a conference. But you're going to a conference. For every day you're at that conference, identify 3 people ahead of time who you want to meet. Nowadays, there's typically a conference app where you can see the registration list, or maybe there's a website for it. Or maybe you can't do it when you get there. But if you can do it ahead of time, identify 3 people you want to meet for each day. So 3-day conference, you want to meet 9 specific people. Uh, Tap into your introverted research skills and preparation. Go to their LinkedIn profile, go to their website, learn about them, and identify for yourself, for each person, what is it that you want to get out of the conversation. So it could be you want career advice. It could be you want to talk to them about a paper they published. It could be that you want to, maybe you're looking for a job, but come up with whatever it is, prepare yourself, introduce yourself. So you have your talking points ahead of time. And then when the conference is over, go back and send follow-up emails. Take notes at the end of each day about what you talked to about each of your 3 people, and then connect with them on LinkedIn, send them an email, and keep the conversation going afterward. And what that's going to do for you as an introvert is it's going to give you the opportunity to go deeper into that new relationship that you've just formed, rather than having 40 or 50 surface level, hey, this is my name, this is what I do. And very few people are going to remember that. So as an introvert, success for you in networking is going to be when you do it that way.
That's really leveraging the planning and prep that we like to do, then the research as well as part of that, and then the follow up, the writing, the written form. So that really does encapsulate all of the strengths that an introvert might have. I love that. That's really great advice. I'm gonna steal all of this, Stacey, because you're just giving us really great practical tips that we can take away. And I feel like anyone who is an extrovert can also understand the introverts on their team a whole lot better too. So extroverts, we're talking to you too. This isn't just about, it's not just for us. But hopefully, the extroverted leaders can understand their introverted colleagues and leaders and team members. Because to your earlier point and what you were saying about getting to know your team members, you can create a space where everybody can thrive and communicate and connect. But it's our job as a leader to make that initiative and to be proactive. So, are there any other tips or recommendations that you would have for that leader making that welcoming environment for their team?
Well, I think what I'd say is for both the leaders and other people in your workspace, I hope that what I've shared in this discussion lets you open your mind to the fact that, don't if you're seeing someone who your default might be to think, oh, that person's not friendly, or they don't like to, work well, they don't work well with others, right? They don't like to play in the sandbox. Open your mind to the fact that it could be that they are introverted, and the way that they're behaving, the way that they're showing up, has nothing to do with the way they feel about you. It doesn't mean they don't like to collaborate. It doesn't mean that they don't like to be part of a team. But like any individual, they work in a certain way, and let people be who they are. Be welcoming, and be accommodating to that, and see what you can do to respond to different work styles. And it's going to make your team a whole lot stronger, and the work product that you put out a whole lot better.
Stacey, I feel so extra energized from our conversation. And
Nice.
so just a great testament to your understanding of all of us introverts and how we can communicate together to make and craft that space where everybody is welcome. I hope that everybody listening can get that same kind of energy and practical insight from that too, because everything you shared is something that we can all take away and either help our own selves or help our team members to create that space. So thank you so much. I'm already making mental notes, but if anyone has any kind of success from these insights, please share them. We definitely want to keep the conversation going online too, Stacey. So how can people reach out to you? How can they work with you and engage your coaching services?
Thanks for asking. So my business is I Factor Leadership. My website's ifactorleadership.com. If you go there, you can find out about how we can work together, how I can work with you as a coach. You can schedule a free introvert career strategy call with me, and I can get you started in thinking about how can you tap into your introverted strengths to be more effective at work and show the world your leadership. And I believe this episode is going to be coming out in February when I'll be launching the next cohort of my hybrid learning program. That's called the Introverts Leadership Formula. And it's an on-demand program that also has some private coaching with me. And it will guide you as an introvert to become a more powerful communicator, to prevent burnout at work, maintain your energy levels. And then literally, how do you ask for a raise, a promotion, anything else that you're looking for? How can you become a better negotiator as an introvert? That's something that a lot of introverts struggle with. So that's what the course tackles. And I would love to reach out. I would love you to reach out to me. I'd love to connect with folks. And I hope that what came across is I'm so passionate about this work, and my hope is that all the introverts out there will figure all the stuff out that took me decades to come to, that they really are, they're pretty great the way they are. And it's just figuring out how do you use those gifts.
Well, I definitely can see that value, Stacey, and all that you have to offer. And I'm so hopeful that people will sign up for the course and get in touch with you because even just our conversation, I feel like you've opened and unlocked some doors for me and some different mindset shifts. So thank you for that. And, for all the great work that you're doing. I definitely hear your passion. I know everybody else will too. And I hope that they will follow you and connect. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the course. We'll definitely be posting the link to that and getting some information out there. And Stacey, you're always welcome back. And if you want to share anything more about what you're doing and ongoing, I would love to stay in touch. So thank you for being a wonderful guest and sharing all of your wisdom with us. And thank you all for listening to another episode of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders, the podcast.